Hello everyone. Welcome to the first of many little lecturettes for this semester. Today we're going to break apart health communication, what it is, the language we use in describing health communication in itself, and also the population, individuals, families that we serve and hope to reach with health communication, and also some theories that fuel health communication and behavior change, public health in general. So first let's start with what communication is. It's a two-way exchange, really, and it can be a number of things. It doesn't have to be a conversation. It can certainly be an exchange with various forms of media, written, print, online, you name it. But it requires common signs and a common language, so to speak, and not necessarily saying Spanish or English or French or what have you, but things that make sense to both parties. Communication hinges on an understanding, and sometimes that understanding hinges on rapport and these commonalities, right? This common ground that we share. Oftentimes, when we're talking about public health, I think of epidemiology. Sometimes we hear the same phrases in community health education, talking about our target group. I would like to call that phrase into question. When we are targeting a group, when we are saying that we are aiming for a particular group to work with, I think those are kind of, it's a bit of an oxymoron. So if we are throwing something at someone, one of us has the power and one of us is being hit. I would rather us, for the purpose of this class, and there's certainly people who would argue otherwise, use the phrase key group. Key group implies that there is participation, there's a focus rather than an aim, and it implies an interaction, that two-way street that targeting doesn't. Again, I think of kind of throwing an arrow at something and hoping that it sticks, or worse than that. So phrasing that I'm going to be using throughout the semester is key group rather than target group. And again, there's room for argument. We can certainly have that in class. Of course, we have to also add in a definition of health, which I'm guessing is very familiar to all of you by this point in your education, using the World Health definition that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So we're putting together health, this definition that is all-encompassing, with communication, and that's how we end up with this arm of public health. Health communication has a number of definitions. I pulled some that are more succinct and some that are a bit more verbose. You can glom onto the one that feels best to you. But the CDC puts out a definition about health communication that states that it's the study and use of communication strategies to inform and influence individual decisions that enhance health. Shivo, who I'm having you read some of her text from, goes into a bit more detail. Health communication as a field of study is a fairly new thing. Health communication usually has been embedded in public health campaigns and efforts, but it hasn't been held onto its own as a freestanding component or as a significant contributor until fairly recently. So Shivo talks about health communication being this multifaceted and multidisciplinary field of research, theory, and practice. It concerns reaching different populations and groups to exchange about health-related information, ideas, methods of influence, engaging, empowering, supportive individuals. So you can see that Shivo is trying to take some of what the CDC is putting out there as this basic piece of study and practice, and really spelling out and really embedding some of the core values of public health into the definition of health communication that implies that there is engagement and empowerment, and not, again, the targeting so much as this idea of a focused effort. Some of the goals of health communication, the largest being to improve health outcomes by sharing health-related information, is really, if you remember nothing else from this lecture, that's a key piece to remember what health communication really is, because that really is the focus of our semester in many capacities, and how that relates to advocacy, all under the umbrella of consultation. So the objectives of health communication are to engage, empower, and influence individuals and communities, and encourage behavior modification and social change. So I want to highlight the social change aspect of this. It's easy to get caught in the trap of only thinking about how health communication impacts one individual. I think of a doctor-patient relationship. There's often health communication happening there about, let's say, a new diagnosis of diabetes or exercise, diet, you name it. But when we're talking about health communication, it is bigger than that. It is certainly on the individual level, but it's also on this macro level of how health communication can create social change. That's where the advocacy piece comes in. So health communication is really, the mandate of health communication is the impact on vulnerable and underserved populations. The whole overarching goal really of public health, in my opinion, again, this is always up for discussion, is to achieve health equity. We'll spend some time talking about that in future classes, but please consider that when we're talking about health communication as a branch or arm, field of study, however you want to phrase it, of public health or community health education, then you need to think about those that we are hoping to help, and those who are hoping to help are all of us, to achieve equity so that everyone is on the same playing field. In order for health communication to be effective, there's a number of different pieces. I'm not going to read the slides to you. Please do so on your own. But it certainly has to embody a couple different things. And the thing that should jump out at you on this page is that we can't talk at a group. We have to talk with a group. I'm sure you all can relate to being talked at and how wonderful it feels, right, to be talked at rather than talked with. This is a key piece, and I think it's a very easy trap to fall into where we get busy as a profession talking at people as opposed to talking with them, hearing what they have to say, learning what they think. And I'm not talking about they as a collective group like a culture. No, I'm talking about that person or that small group or that community that we're working with. Learn what they think because it's their values and where we have to meet them that we need to best understand so we can best serve them. It's not us demanding, it's us serving and helping them achieve the goals that they want through health communication. So we have to go beyond the surface level of idea of us talking at folks. So some key characteristics that I think will help frame the conversations we're going to have throughout the semester about health communication is that it has to be people-centered, much like I just said, engaging, geared towards the audience as an active participant, and again, not a target. I'm going to belabor that point this lecture. Sorry, but not sorry. It also should be evidence-based. If we have evidence to substantiate the ways in which we're moving because other people's work with similar communities or topics, that's a very helpful piece. The tricky thing is that we might not always have that information available to us, but we should get busy generating it for other people. So evidence-based is also including of audience analysis, knowing your audience, like I just mentioned, talking with folks to understand where they are so we can fine-tune and craft messaging that fits their needs and what they want to achieve. Health communication, just like public health, ought to be multidisciplinary. It should not be an isolated arm who's working independently of everybody else. It should be in conglomeration with, in collaboration with everybody, including the very people we're hoping to message to or with. Should be strategic, response to an actual identified need by research, by confirming, again, what the audience is looking for, as opposed to us walking in and saying, you know what we think you need this. That's a lose-lose situation. Should be process-oriented. Appreciate the multifaceted process. This is health communication in general, is a slow-moving, kind of incremental train. We aren't going to see these huge changes in people overnight. Health communication helps move campaigns forward inch by inch, baby steps towards a larger goal, but steps nonetheless. Health communication should also be cost-effective, which can be tricky. When I'm asking you to sit down and talk with people as opposed to just go in and talk at them, that costs more in time and energy and sometimes in food and supplies to engage folks. But to the best of our ability, health communication should be cost-effective. I would argue that it can't be cost-effective if you don't actually talk to people first. Then you're throwing money at the wall to see if it sticks, and that's a foolish game to play. Health communication also should be creative and support of strategy, so be thoughtful, be planful, and look at the overall mission of the campaign you're working on to see how health communication aspects can help feed that larger goal. Certainly should be audience and media specific, which I said a couple different times. Media specific is talking more about how, depending on how you relay the messaging, if it's through small gatherings and communities, if it's through social media, if it's through the newspaper, if it's through the news, those things matter on how you communicate the message. Health communication also should be about relationship building. Partnerships that sustain and promote health outcomes really help lead to bigger social change. If we just kind of bounce in and bounce out with a message, we don't help to create a rapport and a relationship with communities. And so the message can fall short, especially if there's nothing sustaining it. Again, health communication should be aimed at behavioral and social results. So again, not just at the individual level, but at a larger scale. And certainly must be inclusive of vulnerable and underserved populations. We should not do any programming without those very people we hope to serve at the table with us. They know best. We just have some skills we can offer up. So there's a number of models and theories that apply. Again, some of this might be repeat for you, so bear with me. If it is, you can scan through it. We'll be talking about this again a bit next week. Models and theories in health communication are largely on a case-by-case basis. You have to select which ones best fit the circumstances, the population, the messaging topic. It cannot just be, we use this theory or this model for all health communication. We would, again, fall short. The downside of having such flexibility and going case by case is that sometimes it's difficult to specify an outcome that's dictated by a theory or a model. Oftentimes we're cherry picking from models and theories to inform health communication efforts. So the flexibility always has its consequences, but we learn to roll with them because nothing is static, not the community, not the messaging, not anything else that we're working with. We're working in gray all the time. So it's important also to always put health communication in context. So as you can see in this diagram, health communication is at the center, at least for our purposes, right? But it is affected and affects the key groups and communities, research, health, social and behavioral service and products, social environment, political environment. We could probably add more to this diagram of things that influence what's happening with health communication and what health communication should look like because of it. But it's always important to think about how whatever you're working on fits or doesn't fit, or is influenced or influences things around it. We are not functioning in isolation. We are always functioning in the environment, and the environment is ever-changing and complicated. So there is a cycle of health communication. It's pretty simple and straightforward. Planning, implementation, and monitoring, back to evaluation and refinement, back to planning. Much like research, you just keep refining and asking different questions. Planning, again, should always include the very people that you hope to reach, right? Ideally, people that you hope to reach, the very folks that are receiving the messaging from all of us, should be in every step of this cycle. Again, sometimes can be hard to argue with organizations who don't have the funds to do so or the time frame to do it, but it's something I encourage you to try and stand with and stand by when you're working in these capacities. So here's a couple of things of what health communication can and cannot do. It can certainly help advocate for change. It can raise awareness. It can influence people's perceptions and beliefs. It can encourage collaboration. Communication is a key piece for bringing people together, among other things, right? It certainly cannot work in a vacuum, like I just mentioned. It's never in isolation. It is always within the context of the very people that we're hoping to serve and the political environment that we might be working in an organization, and. It cannot replace infrastructure, services, or capability. The worst thing we can do in health communication is to push a message with someone, for example, like the need to get tested for HIV, and then not have in place places for people to get tested. It does not work to raise awareness and potentially spark some concern without having the services and products, infrastructure ready and waiting for those who are then spurred to movement. I hope that makes sense. It cannot compensate for the absence of treatment, diagnostic, and preventive services, and it cannot be equally effective in all aspects of the message. When we target a message, right, when we skinny in on a message to a particular key group, we know right up front that we are not going to be reaching everybody in that community. We have to hone in and with a particular subset. The messages have to be nuanced, and therefore we close doors to others when we're opening doors for others. So it's a tricky balance. We're going to get into the weeds of this throughout the semester, so don't worry. I realize that I'm painting a very gray picture. That is intentional, and I'll help you sort through the gray, I promise. So, models and theories. As in any other case, models and theories provide a foundation for the planning, monitoring, and evaluation. They help lay out specific communication approaches that informs our movement in any direction, certainly can help to aid in implementation of specific phases of a program and promote an understanding of the key groups that we're talking about. But theories are just a jumping off point. There's always room for new theories and models. There's also room to pull from many others instead of just relying on one theory in particular. People tend to get into a groove of just using one theory or model, like health belief model, for example, and they forego all others. I don't recommend that. I recommend you keep your eyes open to what else is coming out and what best fits the situation that you're in. But health communication is certainly not standing alone in public health. It is absolutely influenced by behavioral and social theories, anthropology, sociology, medicine, marketing, mass media. Many people are engaging in this in different capacities and come at it with a different angle. And I recommend that you listen and read about what those angles look like, because it might inform and flesh out your approach all that much more. So, a couple of quick reminder slides of some of the theories that we'll be talking about. Most of you have had another class that you've probably delved into these theories or models before, but I'm going to give you the skinny of a couple. First is diffusion of innovation theory. So this theory really helps us to think about how people adopt new ideas in a community. So we think about 5 subgroups within that idea, of innovators all the way down to laggards. I love that word. Some people glom onto and run with a new idea, concept, or practice really quickly. And then you have various stages beneath that quick pace of early adopters, early majority, late majority, and the laggards, the last people to go. My father was among the last people to go with cell phones. He just had his first one, I think 2 years ago. That was, I think, in protest. But you get the idea. Some people jump all over it and want the newest technology and push everybody around to do the same, and some people hang way back for various reasons. And we have to think about what those reasons are to help people move forward, especially if we're asking them to grasp a new concept or practice to better their health. So along with those subgroups, there's stages of change that come along with it. We have to move people through awareness, knowledge and interest, decision-making, trial and implementation, and confirmation or rejection of the behavior or the practice that we're asking for. So we see that there's people who glom on and they run through these stages really quickly, and they confirm really quickly and keep moving forward. And there's laggards who might really stay at awareness or knowledge and interest, or sit on a decision for years and years and years. We need to look at those folks to see what we can learn and help them move through if we are asking them to adopt a new behavior that's better for their health. So diffusion innovation theory suggests that change occurs over time, over those stages I just articulated, and that it emphasizes the complex puzzle that is an audience. In any given audience, you will have innovators and you'll have laggards and everybody in between. It's really hard to get any one group to move together at the same pace. And diffusion of innovation theory helps us to think about how to target our message practices. Target's the wrong word, right? How to mold our messaging with the population that we're working with to understand where they are and what they need to move forward with the messaging. Health belief model is probably one you are all familiar with. It, just in summary, right, helps us to think about the risks and benefits of adopting a new behavior, and it really presents the risks to motivate change that will mitigate risk. So there's a bit of fear factor in health belief model, right? These are the key components that I'm sure you're likely familiar with: perceived susceptibility, perceived severity, perceived benefits, barriers, cues to action, and self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is one of the biggest components of many, many theories that we'll be discussing throughout the semester and that you probably heard about in other classes. If people don't believe that they can do this, they won't. right? I should rephrase it. If they feel that they can't do it, they won't. If they feel that they can, they will be more inclined. Self-efficacy, to some degree, relates to confidence. If you think that you have capacity and the skills and tools and environment necessary, then you're more likely to move forward than if you feel that you can't. Then you just shut down and disengage, right? And you come to this idea of you can or you can't by weighing your perceived susceptibility, your perceived severity, perceived benefits, perceived barriers, and what motivates you to even think about it, right? So maybe I go and get a mammogram because my best friend has a lump and I think, oh, okay, this is really close to me, maybe I should do this. And here's the barriers and here's the benefits, and I'm a little scared of the machine, but it could be life-saving, right? Oh, and I have health insurance that allows me to do this, and I'm over 40, so I can do this for free. That's the kind of process people go through, and sometimes that process takes a long time. Sometimes it's lickety-split. Social cognitive theory, or SCT, you guys have probably all heard about this one as well, thanks to Bandura. It really looks at the results of three things playing together: behavior, personal factors, and outside events. You're looking at both the inter and the interpersonal, with a focus on the external environment as a source of observational learning. So people seeing other people doing things makes a difference in social cognitive theory. Here are the components: attention, retention, reproduction, motivation, performance, and self-efficacy. There it is again, right? When we're thinking about SLT, we think about, okay, what am I seeing around me? Do I remember seeing what I just saw? So for example, if I see someone who is exercising in the morning as I'm driving to work, I usually think to myself, oh, good on them. They got up early this morning and they're going for a run, and I'm driving to work with a coffee and a donut in my hand, right? Do I remember that later on or the next morning when I think, oh, I'm going to go out for a run and put down my coffee and my donut, right? That leads into reproduction. Motivation, what's driving me to try it out? That's a loaded question, right? I'm sure all of you could have a different motivation for running or not running. Performance, how often and consistently do you perform this new behavior or don't you? And self-efficacy goes a long way. Like, I can do this. This is something I can implement in my own life. Right? The next is theory of reasoned action. Again, probably something you're familiar with. This suggests that behavior is determined by the strength of intention. How badly do you want it is what we're going to see the results from. So two factors that contribute to intention, according to the authors Fishbein and Ashton, is attitude towards the behavior and the subjective norms about the behavior. So does this fit in my community? Do I see other people doing this? Is it the norm? Will I be chastised for it? Will I be encouraged to do it? Social norms really play a role, more than we all like to admit, in our behaviors. If it's normal in our group, we're more inclined to do it. If it's outside the box, we're less inclined to do it, unless some of us like to push the envelope, right? So attitudes toward a behavior reflect the individual's beliefs about the consequences of the behavior, and subjective norms are influenced by whether significant others will approve of the behavior. This normative belief piece, the subjective norms, is something unique to theory of reasoned action that some of the other theories don't capture. You can see already how you could cherry pick from any one of these theories little pieces that would inform how you would talk about a particular issue or behavior that you're hoping to help folks move toward in a community. Social norms theories, I kind of went over this, but the idea of these two: ideation theory, where individuals and communities' behaviors are influenced by the context in which people live, work, and play. That probably is not a surprise to any of you. And convergence theory focuses on mutual understanding and agreement. So requires participatory process of information sharing, mutual understanding and agreement of meanings. There's no hierarchy within convergence theory. People come together and decide upon the norms and work from there. Another theory you probably are more familiar with than most others is stages of behavior change, aka trans-theoretical model. This is where we help people move through pre-contemplation, contemplation, decision, action, and maintenance. Much like diffusion of innovation, in any one group you'll see that there are folks at different stages, and depending on where they are in their thinking about a new behavior, if they're in contemplation, it's different than if they're in pre-contemplation. Pre-contemplation assumes that people, it's not even on their radar to think about. Contemplation is, maybe I should run and put down the donut, right? Decision making is when you decide to run or decide not to. Then engaging in that action and maintaining that action. So there's lots of layers to trans-theoretical model. This is just, again, a brief little reminder of what is at play in health communication and behavior change theories. Communication for persuasion theory is something that is likely not familiar to you, and we'll dig into this one a little bit more in the weeks to come. Communication, in many ways, when we're talking about health communication, is a form of persuasion, whether we like it or not. Even if we're sitting with a group and hearing from them, we are then asking for them to help to put together a message that will persuade those around them to move towards this healthy behavior or change that leads to healthier life, right? So communication for persuasion theory suggests that well, it gives us 12 interdependent steps that we need to think about, one being contingent on the next. So when I think back to trans-theoretical model, we have pre-contemplation, contemplation, decision. You can see this echoed here in communication for persuasion theory. You have to first be exposed to even know that you should think about it. Then you have to pay attention to it, find it interesting, understand it, figure out how the behavior could fit in your life, accept the change, remember and validate the message. This is a much more explicit, 12-step explicit way of thinking about how people move through awareness to action and everything in between. Mass media. There are many aspects of this that we'll get into later. But we are truly in a culture of mass media, and there are a couple different theories and models that we'll be touching on this semester. I'm just going to give a nod to it here so we can talk about it again later when we have some of the basics under our belt a little bit better. Cultivation theory of mass media suggests that repeated, intense exposure to deviant definitions of reality in mass media produce perceptions of the realities as normal. We could say a lot about this, and I'm going to refrain. But the idea is that when you have messaging such as science, I think of Today's Show, they're very good at saying, oh, they said, being researchers said, that a glass of red wine is the equivalent of 30 minutes of cardiovascular exercise, right? When you are hearing this kind of messaging, or that, chocolate prevents preterm labor, if that's around you at high intensity all the time, you start to believe that that is what in fact is the case, when in fact it's likely not the case. So when we're talking about cultivation theory of mass media, we also have to think about, in crafting messages with communities, what we're combating, what we're up against in terms of the quote-unquote realities that people have become accustomed to thanks to mass media. New media, social influence model, talks about the participation in virtual communities. People are online, Facebook, Twitter, you name it. There's so many proliferations of social media, and people really do glom on to that as a community. And sometimes when people are isolated otherwise, virtual communities are the only communities that they feel attached to. I mean, to think about how we would message with folks who are in that reality. There's a lot of marketing-based models. Social marketing is an intriguing thing to think about. Like I mentioned in class the other day, health communication, public health in many ways, is marketing. Social marketing suggests that the application of commercial technologies, planning, execution, evaluation, is designed to influence voluntary behavior of intended audiences in order to improve their personal welfare and that of their society. So different from marketing, flat marketing, which is really designed to market a product to then benefit the producers of that product. Social marketing is using the same tools of marketing to better society. So the gain is not in the pockets of the businesses, but in the pockets and hearts and minds and bodies of society. Social marketing talks about 4 Ps: product, price, place, and promotion. We'll get into those details further in the semester. Again, just want to introduce some of these ideas to you now. So borrowing from marketing and making it about social gain. Pretty intriguing to me. Communication for development is an integrated marketing model that is defined as this. I'm not going to read you the gist of it here. You can also read about it in the chapter that was provided to you. But using communication to help transform the state of poverty to one of dynamic socioeconomic growth. If you are picking up on a trend here, in all of this, much like in all of public health, the goal is for a better society for all, right? So we're aiming for equity and not just individual behaviors and limit it to that. So there's many other communication for development ideas. I'm not going to do anything besides read the titles to you now, but communication for behavioral impact and communication for social change. All of these things are really about developing, working, moving towards a much more healthy, robust, and equitable society. Of course, there are some of the other components that we always have to think about that we see most often in medical settings, and that is arguably most pervasive in mass media, which are biomedical models. So the standard issue medical model views poor health to be strictly physical ailment that can be explained, identified, and treated with physical means. I hope that we all have a lot to say about that one, and I ask you to question it if that's something that you ascribe to now, right? Biopsychosocial model, poor health is not just physical, but is influenced by individuals' feelings, beliefs, and life circumstances, is a step away from the strictly physical means and helps to start incorporating ideas of a person in context of the environment in which they live in, and that their head and their bodies are actually connected so that their mind, body, and spirit all work as one. So, at closing, 30 minutes later, theory can limit practice in many ways. If we stick to only what the theories are suggesting, if we stick with only one theory in particular, we oftentimes are closing doors to different aspects of what's happening. If we function only from theory and not from thoughtful, meaningful understanding of the communities in which we're working with and hope to serve, we're limiting the scope and effectiveness of much of everything we do. So I encourage you to take what we can from theories and put them into practice, but only in the context and only in addition to sitting down with folks. Otherwise, we are throwing spaghetti at the wall, very expensive spaghetti at the wall, and seeing what sticks. So we'll talk in class more about all of this. You know where to find me if you have any questions.